Bernard. Welcome, everybody. It's great to see all of you back in Paris for La Rentrée, and I am so pleased to welcome William Jordan. Would you like to stand up?
Sure. I will.
There you go, William Jordan. So William and I were trying to figure out how many times he has spoken here, which this is, what do you think, fourth, fifth, sixth?
Sixth or seventh.
I know, but that sounds like too many.
I know it does, but I've been speaking here since probably around 2014. So.
Okay, well, okay, but the reason for this is, first of all, we've been doing this since 2003. Okay, so we've had a lot of speakers, but it's mainly because William is so interesting. I mean, his talks are amazing, and so he just gets invited back. Okay. And today's talk is from, did I pronounce it,
Dhahran
to Paris, how a reluctant Arabist, I didn't know that word existed, became an accidental American. You guys,
Parisian.
I wrote down American.
I know why.
But you're not an accidental American.
I'm not. I'm an accidental Parisian.
Okay, but, okay. William is a retired U.S. diplomat, and he specializes in the Arab world as well as France. And that's one reason that his talks are so interesting. You'll find him on France 24 and other media as a
Talking head, commentator.
A commentator. Commentator is the word. And he's also a past president of ARO. Everybody know what the Association of Americans Residing Overseas. Is that right?
Resident overseas.
Resident overseas. Thank you for the correction. Okay. You know what? I'm getting off the stage.
You need an assistant.
I'm leaving.
You need a staff assistant. So.
1, 2. Where's Arena? There's a few here.
Right.
So if you need anything, you talk to them, not me. Okay.
Right.
I'm off.
Okay.
It's William. Stop.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for coming. It's interesting. I mean, I see some very familiar faces, and I see a lot of faces I've never seen before. Those of you who are coming out to hear this or just to be here and you happen to find the subject somewhat interesting, welcome. Thank you for coming. Like we were just discussing, I've been here several times. I've spoken on a whole variety of topics. In fact, being somebody with my background and given how Adrian often tries to talk about the lighter things and the more interesting things, the cultural things in life, rather than the hard, prickly, political, and whatever you want to call it, kinds of things that I dealt with from my 30-year career in the State Department. When I started, I talked about the secret life of an American diplomat. I did 2 parts on this. I talked about what it was like to be an American diplomat posted here in Paris, and then I broadened it to talk about some of the other places where I'd served, primarily the Arab world, so that people understood a bit what it's like actually being a diplomat. You know, what do we do? Now, Adrian has had some really amazing guests over the years, and recently she had some guests, because I committed months ago, without knowing what I would talk about, to doing this presentation. And 2 people spoke most recently who impressed me in a way that is going to sound a bit strange. Krista Bender came here talking about leaving a kind of unsatisfying life in California to take the Cordon Bleu wine appreciation course. And she eventually found an apartment in Paris, and you know, she's managed to live a certain part of her life's dream to be here in Paris. Janet Holstrand was here last time, in July, similarly talking about how she ended up in France and how moving into a small village, I think for the harvest, right? And you know, sort of.
She originally was picking grapes in
Right.
Champagne when
Right.
she met her husband there, and they ended up buying
Right.
a chalet.
And I thought, okay, now here's the weird part of it. I'm a either reformed or maybe a never-ending comic book geek. And one of the things that comic book geeks love is what are called origin stories. These are often the most valuable comics in any series because they explain why the characters became the way that they did and what it was that motivated them, and etc. So I love hearing these stories. And I thought, you know, I've got an origin story, and sadly, or maybe not sadly, but to put it in context, The Economist actually wrote an article just the other week about this, talking about Americans moving overseas. Everybody's got a story. But I thought, okay, I've got a story that ties in this whole diplomatic part of it with, you know, my own, my eventual migration to Paris. And I actually start from a completely different place. A lot of the other people loved France, took French in high school and college. They visited here. They thought France was the greatest country in the world, and why couldn't they spend more time here? I came at it from the completely opposite point of view. I was somebody who, in the 1960s and the 1970s, was encumbered by all of the anti-France, anti-French prejudices. French are snobs. They're arrogant. There's the famous.
They're smelly.
Yes.
Well,
their cheese smells like a locker room. And in fact, this is all before the phrase was coined, cheese-eating surrender monkeys. And when I was growing up, this is back in the 60s, what was France known for? Pulling out of NATO and kicking American and other bases out of France. So being an unreliable ally, and losing so many wars, going back certainly to the Franco-Prussian War. So, in addition to being just basically considered ungovernable, and the language.
Well, they still are ungovernable. Okay, anyway.
And the language being impenetrable to anybody who doesn't learn it. I had all of these prejudices. Now, by rights, I should actually not be living here in France. My dream was to live in the UK. And as you'll hear, I worked hard to make that dream happen. But then I joined the Foreign Service, and that caused me to end up, of all places, in Saudi Arabia, and I met French people who totally changed my attitude towards the French and about the French language, and about France as a place to visit and ultimately to want to live in. So that's the broad introduction. The Dhahran part is because it was in Saudi Arabia, and Dhahran, Saudi Arabia, where it all started. But let's sort of start at the beginning so you know where I am, who I am, and where I came from. I hope I'm going to try to make this as fast as possible because I ran through this several times. It was overlong and it was disastrous. So I'm hoping that with the energy of the crowd and with everybody being here, it's going to force me to speed it up. We can always come back in the questions and answers to things. But I'm going to be showing you a lot of photos, some of which are incredibly embarrassing. But I felt after the last couple of presentations that it was important to do what I never did when I was a diplomat, which is prepare PowerPoint slides and actually show people what was going on.
This is the first time you've had a PowerPoint
Exactly.
presentation. Mm-hmm.
So let's go to the first slide. This is my father, Captain Watt W. Jordan Jr. He was commander of the USS Leahy, as it says on his cap. My father was a naval officer. He came from a small town in Alabama. This man here, my paternal grandfather, was his father. He was a pharmacist, or as he used to like to say, a druggist. And his dream was to pass the family business to his son. His son, growing up in the Depression and World War II, decided, I don't want to be a druggist in a small Alabama town. So he went to NROTC and went to Auburn University, and when he graduated in 1950, went off to help fight in the Korean War. He stayed in the Navy. He went to South Carolina for an assignment where he met my mother, who's from Charleston, South Carolina. So my roots are very much in the South. I am, and this is important to know, not because I'm proud of the of the religious aspect of this. I am a real WASP, with a underline the P, Protestant. Not because of me, but because of my family and everything that mattered to them. Now, my father committed the sin of his father. As you can see, that little sailor boy is yours truly. Commander Jordan. So my father very much hoped that I would follow in his footsteps, that I would feel the calling to national service, to join the Navy, probably spare him the college bills by going into NROTC myself. And so what did I do? I did exactly like my father did, and I broke his heart by going a different way. Now, initially, as the next slide shows.
Yeah, next slide.
Next slide. I wanted to be a spy. Some of you may know Robert Vaughn as Napoleon Solo in The Man from U.N.C.L.E. Sean Connery as James Bond, and I point out that this is from Russia with Love. This suit he's wearing is my absolute favorite suit. I have spent my entire life looking for exactly that suit. And that's Patrick McGowan, John Drake, or The Prisoner from Secret Agent. And this is me in December 1965 trying out the look. Automatic case, plastic gun. My sister, Susie, who's clearly either not impressed or wondering whether her chatty Cathy is going to fall over, or checking the hemline on her skirt. This was what I wanted to be. I wanted to look like these guys. I wanted to wear a suit at the age of 8. I wanted to be, a man of action, intrigue, mystery, sophistication. I wanted to see the world too. I just wasn't going to wear a military uniform. I was tired of the yes sir, no sir, 3 bags full sir, and it was Vietnam, and so the whole generation gap thing was in play. Now up here you see this little stamp, the UN stamp with a mushroom cloud on it. I was also a stamp collector, so I was very interested in the world, and especially the United Nations through that. When I was in high school and college, I was in the Model United Nations movement, which some of you may know. So all of this was like gathering up to where, okay, I wasn't going to be in the military, but I wanted to serve. The spy thing, okay, the spy craze came and went, but I wanted to be out. I wanted to be in the world. I wanted to do all these things. So then I went to college, next slide, and became this guy.
I cannot believe.
I became this guy. I can tell you, I assure you, this guy was not a chick magnet.
You look like you were a chick magnet. I mean, the one on the right, forget it, man.
Well, too cool for school, right? The thing about the hair. Yeah. Okay, the hair is a really remarkable aspect of this.
Yeah, Peter Fonda.
That hair drove me crazy. I wanted straight hair. I wanted really straight. I wanted to look. This doesn't mean anything to a lot of people. I wanted to look like Neil Young did in Buffalo Springfield. If that means anything. Any of you who are really old enough. I wanted it straight. I also wanted facial hair. I wanted all of that stuff so that I could look like Neil Young. I ended up looking like that. Now, the women I knew who were not attracted to me for anything in particular loved the hair. They loved the hair. They said, your hair is so thick, it's wavy, it's exactly what I want my hair to be. And I said, I wish I could have your hair. So I went to school in central Pennsylvania and Dickinson College, Carlisle. And I graduated with a degree, double major in international studies and economics. And while I was there, I did a semester in the UK. I loved it. Now I used to watch Monty Python and Upstairs Downstairs on PBS back in the day when those were things. And so I loved British culture. Unlike but I also, because of my whole French complex, in terms of language, I had made the supreme mistake of not taking French. I refused to take French. refused to, and I also didn't take Spanish because I was in Northern Virginia in the early 1970s when Hispanics weren't really there. So it didn't seem to make much sense. If I'd stayed in California, it might have made sense. What did I take? German. Oh. Probably the least useful foreign language to take in high school and college. 5 years of German did me no good. So naturally, there was no program in Germany for me to go to. I went to the UK. Most of my American student colleagues took every opportunity to go across the channel to Europe. I thought, well, maybe I should go visit Germany. But you know what? I didn't want to go through France. I didn't want to deal with going through France. So I didn't. But what that created, the German me, was that I wanted to come back to the UK for my graduate work. I wanted to come back for my master's degree. So I graduated from college and
Next?
did two things. I applied to graduate schools in the UK, got a slot at the University of Sussex near Brighton in southern England, and I took the Foreign Service exam. December 1979, the Foreign Service exam. I had a job for a year, earning money. My father made it very clear, okay, I paid for your undergraduate, you're paying for your graduate school. One of the reasons for going to the UK, I could do in a year what it would take me 2 or 3 years to do in an American school at a significantly higher tuition rate. So, next slide. This is me in the UK. That's Edinburgh in background. Now this will earn somebody a free drink if they can identify where this is. It's very hard to see, but there's a green dome in the background, and it's an old Italianate village, and I will give you a hint, it's in North Wales, and it is directly related to one of the characters, one of the spies that you saw.
North. Sean Connery, he's Scottish.
This is the village from The Prisoner. Anybody who remembers that series from the 60s, okay, well, look it up afterwards. It's a great series, best series ever. Now, when I was in the UK, I was studying international relations, and I ended up researching a lot of diplomatic history, which meant I got to go to the archives and I got to read the dispatches of the diplomats, British diplomats. And I said, this is really what I want to do. So this whole Foreign Service thing really matters to me. I want to be writing these things that historians later, are going to unearth. They're going to see what I have to say, and they're going to pass judgment on whether I spoke truth or not. And very often speaking truth in ways that is inconvenient to the government of the day. The other thing that happened was, as I was studying all of this stuff, I suddenly found out French, being the diplomatic language, is everywhere in international relations studies. Everything you read. And the British, in particular, use French all the time, because most of the British diplomats of the day of the era I was studying had French as a second language. So I'm like, what am I going to do? I talked to a British-American friend of mine who later joined the British Foreign Service. He had French in high school and college, and I said, look, man, I need to start rethinking a lot of this stuff. And we started talking. I said, can you teach me a simple phrase, so that I get a feel for the language? And what he taught me was, il n'y a pas de justice dans ce monde. There is no justice in this world, which I consider today to be one of the perfect French phrases for anybody to learn. And we spent like 2 hours getting that accent down so that it didn't sound like an American stumbling over it all. We also did a day trip. This is back in the days of ferries, right? In Dieppe. We spent the day together in Dieppe. Despite my seasickness, it was entrancing. This is right after François Mitterrand was elected in 1981, coming from Thatcherite Britain to Mitterrandien France. It was like, yes, yes, yes. Then Reagan America in the North, the U.S. And I thought, this is fantastic. So I'm suddenly sitting in outdoor cafes that were in all of the textbooks and all of the things that I had seen, where we had these wonderful baguette sandwiches and wine on the wall of the was at a crossroads here. I had funding to continue my PhD in the UK. And like I said, if I had gone, if anybody is familiar with the Sliding Glass Doors film with Gwyneth Paltrow, if I had gone through the sliding glass door then, I would not be talking to you today. I would probably be a retired academic somewhere, living somewhere in the UK with my British family, or join the Foreign Service. My parents, I said, I have this choice. I told my parents, you've got to find out. I haven't heard from the State Department. What's going on? They replied, you're on the list. You bet you've been selected to be a political officer. Ah, exactly what I want to do. So, next slide. I became a diplomat. Oh, but I have to say, when I got back to the States, to deal with my French inadequacy, I bought this book, Le Mot Juste. It's a collection of words and phrases dating from the 1980s that are based on foreign languages, and French is the biggest chapter in here. So I thought, for a long time, ça suffirait. This will be enough. Okay. So I got my diplomatic passport, and you can see shorter hair. Weird sort of chestnut kind of color by then. Hard to believe I ever had hair that color now. And this thing, I can guarantee you, in central Pennsylvania, where the drinking age was 21, will not, if you're carded at the age of 24, will not pass muster in Pennsylvania. I never went back to that restaurant ever again.
What do you mean they didn't accept your passport as an ID?
They had been raided by the Liquor Control Board in Pennsylvania, and so they decided they were only going to accept
A driver's license?
things issued in Pennsylvania. And so,
And a passport doesn't qualify?
well, I said, I showed my Virginia driver's license, and then I said, well, because I was showing it off to a friend of mine from college, and I said, listen, I have a diplomatic passport from the State Department, and I showed it to him, and he said, we don't care. Okay? I'm not doing business here anymore. So I, over the following year, went through orientation training, language training, and consular training because I was assigned to Consulate General in Bahrain, Saudi Arabia. I was afraid, given that Reagan, Al Haig was president, was Secretary of State, and I was afraid I was going to get sent to, he wanted to be president, I was afraid I was going to get sent to Central America, the new Vietnam, as the left was calling it back then. I did not want to go there. But Saudi Arabia, okay, Saudi Arabia sounded like it would be okay. Saudi Arabia sounded acceptable. Besides, I was interested in the Arab world. I was interested because of all this model UN stuff in the question of Palestine and Arab-Israeli issues. And I thought, sounds interesting, sounds cool. So, next slide. I show up in Dhahran, Saudi Arabia. This is my office. This is my house and my tiny little car, which I use to zip around the bumper cars that is traffic in Saudi Arabia. And this is the view outside of the consulate compound. Dry, dusty, arid, hot most of the year, or cold and wet the other part of the year. Not a very exciting, happy place. Now, I did consular work, which some of you may know, and we come back to this. I don't want to talk a lot about what was wrong in Saudi Arabia. All I want to say right now, there was a culture shock of dealing with the country. I learned about Islamic fundamentalism when I was in Saudi Arabia. I learned all about all the problems, the real problems of being in society with strict segregation of women and where women cannot drive, which had a major impact, morale and work-wise, as far as the women who were assigned there, American women who were assigned there. There was also just this bizarre situation where you had expats living on compounds that were almost extraterritorial, where anything went, versus what was supposed to be happening in Saudi society. when we went into language training after arriving, my colleague and I, the first word we asked her to give us, because we had not learned it in Washington, was the Arabic word for hypocrite. And it was tough. I mean, being on the visa line, dealing with American citizens all the time, you know, for passports, reports of birth, and other things, it was a bit like being in McDonald's, working in fast food. Worse than that was the prison visits we'd have to make to Americans who very easily ran afoul of Saudi law, drugs, alcohol, you name it. Unauthorized video pornography. It was very stressful from that point of view. As if that wasn't enough. The consulate was extremely dysfunctional. It's a high-low mix of senior people who were kind of on their last legs career-wise, or in sort of purgatory. They had to prove themselves to stay in the Foreign Service, versus us, the junior officers who were coming in brand new. And all we were seeing was that the cool, smart white guys back in Washington we had dealt with in training weren't out in the field showing us what to do. And you'll see her in a minute. My boss, my immediate boss, was I'm sorry, this is going to sound offensive, bitter because of career reasons, alcoholic, superannuated, old consular officer who would go into drunken rages whenever she had a half a bottle of scotch in her, which was every time she was at home or at a reception. It was not a pleasant time. Let's go to the next slide. This is sort of what I dealt with every day, or every now and then. So I love this because, as you can see, I'm not the guest of honor. This is the consul general. This guy looking away just as I'm shaking his hand is sort of the story. I feel like it's the story of my life in the diplomatic service. I'm like the invisible guy that nobody pays attention to. The only thing I'll say about this is that we spent a lot of time in stocking. At least I wore higher, I wore better socks. I made a point of compare myself as far as that is concerned. But you can see how interested I am in what's going on.
About as interested as the guy on the right.
Right, next slide. Now this is that we did have a few folkloric moments where this is a camping trip out near the Kuwaiti border. This is me feeding pita bread to camels. These were kind of the interesting diversions that would occasionally happen, but not often enough. Like I said, it was very stressful. And what do Americans do when they're under stress? What do Americans do when they're in an unhappy situation? What do Americans do?
Drink and eat.
You're getting there. There's a word.
Take drugs.
Party.
Okay.
That's it. So, next slide.
He's covering it all.
One way or another, we're getting there.
Next slide.
Wait. What's with, okay, go back. Okay.
So, if you can imagine this with the soundtrack of 1999 by Prince. This is us getting wet in somebody's hot tub. They're on the consulate compound.
One hump for the road.
Yeah, I'll get to that. This guy, Gérard, was one of the people who changed my life. The other person was Grace, his wife. These were the French saviors in Après. These were the people who changed my attitude and in a lot of ways changed my life. I met them very late. I always found that I met the people who mattered anywhere I lived, like in the last 6 months I was there. And it's like, shit, really? I mean, I only knew them now. I couldn't have met you like 3, 4, 5 months earlier. And they were the most gracious, open, friendly, happy, or I should say they seemed very balanced and adjusted. And they had like this attitude of, whatever, we can deal with it. They invited my colleague, who's this guy, Ron, and I to every one of their Friday, which is the equivalent in Saudi Arabia, was a Sunday lunch. And we would spend hours. And what I got in the habit of doing, but this was not how I gained entree with them. I started bringing bottles of real French wine to these events, and they absolutely loved it. It was like this wonderful synergy. These people, like I said, they were just funny. I mean, they introduced me to all this French music from the early 1980s. What was it, Levita? I mean, that group just totally blew me away, and I hate disco. So this is our farewell party, which they all organized, and one hump for the road was what they decided to put on the stage. Now, they also introduced me. I have to, in full disclosure, they also introduced me to a friend, a female French friend who worked at Aramco. I won't say what capacity, and I won't say anything more about her name. But she and I had a nice hothouse affair right before I left. And this was why I always say that when you have a French boyfriend or a girlfriend, you really want to learn French. And other people,
Sur les oreillers. That's the best way to learn French.
Other Americans I knew taught me, like the killer phrases in the French to say to a French woman, that would have a certain effect. And it was great. It was wonderful. Needless to say, we left. So Ron and I left at the same time. Left Saudi Arabia, and we headed. Next slide. No, sorry. So we're leaving. This is Gwendolyn. I won't give her last name. She's long departed this earth. With the devil horns. She was our boss. She was the Captain Queeg on the USS Kane that was Ron. Ron and I left and went to next slide. La Rochelle, which is where Grace and Gerard had a house, and they were there with us, and they showed us around. They introduced us. They really introduced us to France, or to me, to France and French culture and everything. You could see in the cafe. I remember starting to eat a dinner, and Grace says, "Wait, you can't eat yet." I said, "What? Why? You haven't admired the présentation." So I learned how to eat raw oysters. I learned how I helped devour plateau de fruits de mer, all stuff I never ever would have eaten before in my life. Most amazingly, and I don't think it was this woman, but I think she was an aunt or something of the family. But I met the housekeeper of this family and her lesbian partner. And I was like, what? And it was like, yeah, this is normal, They live together. They're a perfect couple. And I thought, well, this is great. This is really cool. The other weird thing that the weird person they introduced me to was this old geezer who I think was the grandfather of one of the couple, who was a quintessential, this is the early 1980s, remember, quintessential Communist Party member who still had his 1930s, 1940s era Communist Party card. And he showed me also his brand new Front National card. So it's like, I'm suddenly, to me, it's like, I'm like, whoa, there is so much happening in this country. I need to know more. There's a quality of life here. There is something, there is something effervescent about all of this. And so I went back to the States. I went into my new assignment, dealing with the Middle East, and I convinced the folks there to allow me to enroll in early morning French classes at the Foreign Service Institute. I did that for about 3 years, getting up, early as hell to be down by 7 a.m. for hour and a half long courses before starting work every day. And next slide. And this is kind of my life. This is my apartment in Washington. I went to every French film. La Chèvre, Gérard Depardieu was in it, Pierre Richard, they did like 3 or 4 of these films
Yeah,
together.
look at him then.
La Balance,
La Balance.
One of my favorite French crime film from the early 1980s. I subscribed to France Amérique, which published Figaro on a weekly basis, and I started taking the Champs-Élysées audio books. Back then, no internet, no TV5 Monde. I went to everything I could to gobble up as much French and French stuff as I could. Next slide. I would visit France every opportunity I had. This is from a trip in 1985. I took these photos. These two are Aimé, little town in the Dordogne region, a Bastille town. This is where my French Protestant ancestors were from. So I had to make a pilgrimage to Aimé, check it out. And the La Rochelle connection, very important because that was the city they went through, the port they went through on their way to South Carolina when they fled France in the 18th century. So, next slide. The other thing that happened of significance, and she plays an important role not just in my life, but in terms of how I got here, I met and married my wife Margaret. We lived for a while together in this is sort of me trying to be the James Bond, Napoleon Solo, well-dressed diplomat, and we eventually got assigned overseas to Damascus, Syria, via language training in Tunisia. She worked for the State Department as well, but as a civil servant. I managed to get her a job in Damascus, later a job in Amman. I'll go on to the next slide. And this is Damascus. That's also Damascus with the leering guy from Cyprus, the drug agent, DEA agent. This woman, by the way, is not Syrian, she's Canadian. But we did everything we could to visit Paris as often as we could, Margaret and I. This is our daughter, Dana. She's another important person in the story, as I will be explaining later at the very end. Damascus was a terrific assignment. I'll talk about that in more detail. It was a very hard assignment, but it was a rewarding assignment. I went on to Amman, which is a terrible assignment. Very interesting place to be. I was up until Amman, not the reluctant Arabist, I was the enthusiastic Arabist. In Syria, I had to use Arabic every single day. It was tough, but it was exactly what I had trained and wanted to do as a political officer in the State Department. When I got to Amman, all of my interlocutors spoke much better English than I would ever, I spoke almost better English than I did. My Arabic began to deteriorate, but worst of all, I had an ambassador and a deputy chief of mission who, for whatever reason, didn't like me. They wanted me gone, but I couldn't get out, I couldn't do anything else, and that was when I began to search for anything else I could do. I went back to the consular bureau. I said, look, I'll stop doing this political stuff. I want to be a consular officer again. Send me to Latin America, send me to East Asia, send me wherever. They said, no, we're not going to do it. They said, you're NEA, you're the Near East Bureau's person. I was desperate, and worrying and wondering what my future professionally would hold. And then the most unexpected thing happened. Margaret suddenly got a job offer, or had the possibility of bidding on jobs. And the job she bid on that she succeeded in obtaining was Paris. I was like, are you kidding me? Paris? We want to go to Paris? We can actually go to Paris. I went back to everybody. I said, is there a job I could have in Paris working on Arab affairs? Well, there is a job, but we promised to somebody else. I said, fine, I'll take leave without pay. I don't care. I'll figure something out once I get to Paris. Our daughter Dana, we decided, she was of school age by then. We said, we're putting her in a French school. We're putting her in a neighborhood school. We want her to be totally bilingual. We want her to have local playmates, and we want her to be able to see her friends whenever she wants to, and to live the life of a French child as well as an American child. So, next slide. Okay, jumping ahead. So, I spent a while in a bit of a limbo. I ended up going to Cyprus to take part in a French-American mission dealing with crisis management on the Israel-Lebanon border. I took with me 2 books to kill the time, because there was a lot of time to kill while these sessions with the Syrians, the Lebanese, and the Israelis were playing out, trying to hash out some kind of an agreement to deal with all these clashes. So, 501 French verbs. I was determined during that time to master the subjunctive and to get the prepositions down. I'll let you know some other time how that's going. The other book I tried to study cover to cover is this absolutely fantastic book. It continues to be in print and updated, called Mot à Mot. It basically gives you turns of phrases for, when you're in a discussion. It has subject-specific areas like education, health, human relations. I mean, it's an amazing book. But I was waiting for word to come out on for a position in the political section dealing with labor issues, which is boring as hell for a lot of people. But in 1997, as the Jospin government was coming in, it was all about 35 heures and all that stuff. Eventually, I got the job, which allowed me, finally, to consider myself a real Parisian when I bought this, my carte orange, which those of you of a certain age will remember as the Passe Navigo of its time, which the thing that I always loved about this was, it was all handwritten. And if you would pay a fine if you forgot to put the number on your carte orange on the coupon, mensuel or hebdomadaire. So that's how I got here, totally by accident. Because of my wife, it's because of had absolutely nothing to do with everything I wanted about French. 10 years before, I never even really would have necessarily wanted to come here. Once I got here, though, accidentally, I almost didn't want to leave. That's another story. And indeed, next slide, last slide. To pick up on the James Bond thing, there's always James Bond will return, and then it's the next. So William Jordan will return, and everything important I ever learned about the French, I learned from my daughter. And that's Dana. She taught me everything most important lessons I've ever learned about the French. I learned from her, thanks to her experiences on the playground, at school, and all of the various social interactions among children.
And how was her French level compared to yours at the time?
She was very upset that Margaret and I were constantly asking her how to pronounce things. To the point where she would say, you guys really should know this stuff by now. She would say that in English, but she was like, Dad, and then she would,
roll her eyes.
But no, she was remarkable, and in fact, sadly she passed away due to cancer. Her last words to me were in French. That became her natural language. Listening to her play with the dolls at points, when she thought she was alone in French, said it all. So we accomplished that. I mean, she was remarkable. She's very artistic and all kinds of things. But she was probably one of the most exciting and interesting aspects of our life in France, is watching her basically become this binational, bilingual person, very, very normal. So anyway, that's the story. That's how I ended up here. And that's like I said, that's why I consider myself an accidental Parisian. I came from a position where I didn't really care about France, didn't really like the French, didn't really think it was worthwhile. And thanks to some extraordinary people who I think I got to know in the most extraordinary and extreme environment changed all of that. And I'm glad it happened, and I'm thrilled to be here. I'm thrilled, and again, I apologize for the length and all the rest of it, but if anybody has any questions, and they don't have to be about this or anything else, about diplomatic life, about politics, about Americans overseas, about consular work, that's great. Anyway, thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Oh.
You consider yourself an accidental Parisian. You're completely free now. Do you plan to stay in Paris, divide your time with any other place?
Well, I go back and forth several times a year to the U.S. because my mother's still alive. And I've lived here long enough to be able to request French nationality, but there are various hitches and things. My wife is still living primarily in the U.S. She's retired from the State Department, but she continues to do part-time work for them. I don't think it would be good for her, in terms of her security clearance, if her husband, is trying to get French nationality, even though it's not exclusive. But we haven't had the full version of that conversation yet, and I'm waiting for her to kind of give me the high side. But yeah, actually, and I have to say, Margaret, she is, of the two of us, the real Arabist. I'm the reluctant Arabist. I'm the guy who kind of came into it sort of the way a lot of people do in foreign service because of my assignments. She studied it. She got a master's degree at Georgetown Center for Arab Studies, which she thought she wanted to. When she briefly quit the State Department to pursue a PhD in Arab Studies, she wanted to get her French up. She decided, I don't want to do Arabic anymore. I want to study French. She's now got a PhD in French studies. So she's the real, she's the one who should be living here and telling these stories rather than me. But, but that's how it all works out. So yeah, I mean, I can't imagine myself living anywhere else. And when I'm back in the States now, after about 10 days, I go through some sort of withdrawal symptom. I can't wait to be back here. Even my neighborhood, just walking down the streets and the alleyways in my neighborhood, it's like, I feel at home. Whereas when I'm back in the States, usually in a car, it's like, yeah, give me a break. I feel like I've opened a vein, and I'm losing blood while I'm stopping at every single light.
Gosh, that's so familiar.
The reverse culture shock.
Yeah,
Oh.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
I have a question.
Yeah.
First of all, thank you for sharing your life. To me, that can be challenging, but that was very kind of you. I'm curious about families of the Foreign Service. Were there families over there in Saudi Arabia with you? How did the spouses adjust and the children?
Not easily. It's all this issue of for families in a place like Saudi Arabia. I mean, how does the Foreign Service deal with families, children, especially in hardship posts like Saudi Arabia? Back then, it was harder than it is now. The State Department is a very traditional, conservative organization. I remember when we were going through orientation and we were talking about all these issues related to families and spouses, hearing that the Canadian Foreign Service, this was in 1981, made full provision for people who are living together, being going out as if they were married. And my first thought was, and not us, because for a long time I felt I didn't necessarily want to get married, but I did want to find somebody to have a committed relationship with, but I didn't necessarily want to be bound. This is all this religious stuff on me. I didn't want to be bound by all of these conventions. But the Foreign Service is a very conservative institution. It has regulations that are all written accordingly. There were not, actually there were children. The gunny sergeant, who's in charge of the Marine Detachment, had 2 small children. I honestly don't know what happened to them. There was an American school on the consulate compound. run by Mormons, and I say that just because they loved being in Saudi Arabia. I mean, you couldn't recruit a lot of non-Mormon staff to come to a place like Saudi Arabia, but the Mormons enjoyed the rigor of the fundamentalist Islamic strictures, and it worked for them. You know, in other places, I mean, when I was in Algeria, we had small children, but we did not yet have a school that we thought older American kids could go to, so that most of them had to be boarded. Spouses, the problem is generally employment. It becomes a problem if you've got spouses who have careers, because they either have to give them up or they have to hope that they can find a part-time or full-time job at the post. And not every post is able to come up with that. It's better now than it was 40 years ago, I guarantee you that. But it was tough. And most of the people who went to Saudi Arabia were either single, or I dare say married without children, or without children and divorcing. There was a lot of divorce in Saudi Arabia among Americans there.
Why?
Because the wives wanted to get out. It was also pretty. It was, you know, like I said, it was an edgy sort of party environment. Too. Some people would. I don't want to say there was. You know, this is the early '80s. I'm not saying it was a lot of the sort of that, you know, '70s, '80s era wife swapping and that kind of stuff. But people would just decide, you know, I don't want to put up with this anymore. I like this dude over here or that woman over there, and you know, families would just break up because of the stresses and the pressures. I mean, you know, I remember my sponsor was a guy who was a communicator. He had a very nice wife. I spent time with them like for the first month, and then, you know, I see all these suitcases, and I find out, oh, the wife's leaving, and she's gone for good. And she just basically, you know, she'd had an affair, and she just decided, you know, she could do better than this, and she left. So, you know, just a very, you know, there's a lot of drinking, a lot of, you know, I mean,
Partying?
my party was not really representative, but it was. But that was kind of, you know, that was how a lot of people blew off steam, and they did it clandestinely, and they did it in this sort of when they got together, away from the prying eyes of the Saudis. It was to the max. It was pretty amazing.
All hell breaks loose.
Yeah.
Do you think that's different than the rest of the world?
I thought that, well, actually, one of the things I didn't say about Dhahran was that the way a lot of us at the consulate called Dhahran was that we called it the pimple on the butt of the earth, because we were out of sight, out of mind. We were mostly invisible, and we were sort of way out there, and it wasn't necessarily a good thing. And again, I think, you know, it has a lot to do with how people react. I saw similar things in Beirut during the Civil War at the embassy in Beirut, which was looked like Kaysan. I mean, it looked like a fortification, and people basically acted like that. Marriages broke up because of those kinds of assignments. Algeria during the quasi-civil war during the 1990s was a similar place where, I mean, I had a residence there as the deputy chief of mission. There was a little room which was converted from being a traditional hammam into a full tilt boogie hot tub room that was called the Boom Boom Room. And during this quasi-civil war period, the Marines and others would invite local women in to have fun in the Boom Boom Room. The Boom Boom Room had been condemned by the time I was there. I wanted to have it turned back into what it was originally. I wasn't able to do that. But I think that, you know, I would say that people in stressful situations like that, it tends to breed, you know, sometimes a behavior that you don't find elsewhere. Here at the embassy in Paris, It's a totally different thing. Everybody is scattered to the four corners. They're all living in apartments where they don't see much of each other, or you have the poor schnooks who are living in the compounds in Neuilly or Boulogne-Billancourt, and they're sort of isolated. There's very little that's bringing them together. There's not really, the American community in Paris, with the exception of this fine Après Midi community, is not very cohesive. We don't have like a major, we have the American Club of Paris, but it's not the same as like the British Social Club out in Meudon. It's not a physical location where people come and commune. When we celebrate the 4th of July, we don't do it all together. It's all done separately. So there's a different set of problems going on here in Paris, which I think has to do with a certain amount of social isolation, especially among those who don't get French language instruction, and just kind of almost haves and haves not things, because France is an expensive city and not everybody can afford to really enjoy what's going on here. So that's a whole different set of problems than, say, in a place like Dahran, where money was never the issue. I never had so much disposable income as a young adult as I did in Saudi Arabia. The question was, what were you going to spend it on, and what was that going to mean, and where were there going to be risks or anything else associated with it? Yes, sir, James.
Yes, on all of the different missions that you were on, going back to the theme of a spy here, that you wanted to aspire to, what was the most dangerous situation you were faced, outside of the compound, of course? As you go out as an American into these different countries, did you ever feel threatened? Did you have to use your spy training to protect yourself?
My spy. I wish I had spy training. By the time I finally got training in counter surveillance and that kind of stuff, I was in like the last year of my career in the State Department. That's how stingy they are in providing that kind of training. I'll give you two examples of situations where I wasn't really sure how things were going to play out. The first was in Beirut, where I was on a temporary mission. This was during the Civil War, and I was visiting as the Syria desk officer. At that time, I thought I was going out to Beirut to be a political officer, and so the embassy there set up all these meetings for me. Well, they didn't. Normally, you send people out to these meetings with somebody from the embassy because, as a courtesy. Well, no, as a courtesy and to take notes and to decide whether or not you want to have it written up as a report to send back to Washington. Well, I was sent on this meeting to the Defense Ministry by myself. So, okay. So the car takes me out there. It's this lightly armored, car, typical sort of thing. And I go and have my meeting, and I come out expecting the car to be there, and there's no car. And I'm like, okay, here I am in the middle of a country, Civil War, and there's this militia man standing next to me with an AK-47. He's like, he's dressed in civilian clothes, very typical out there, but, and the thing I kept focusing on was he had like a decoupage of the Virgin Mary on the stock of his rifle. And I'm thinking to myself, is he my protection? Is he a potential threat? What's going on? And I didn't have a radio. This is before cell phones. I said, how do I contact the embassy? How do I let anybody know this is going on? The second time, eventually, the car did show up within like 10 minutes, but it was just an awkward sort of, standing around, what do I do? The other time was in Saudi Arabia. I was coming back from seeing my girlfriend, and it was late at night. The Saudis did not like people being out on the roads late at night. I had not been drinking. Let's just say I hadn't taken a shower after seeing my girlfriend, and I was the duty officer, so I had a radio with me. And this cop stopped me. And I'm thinking, okay, what's this going to mean? So I hand him my carnet diplomatique and thinking, okay, this is my get out of jail free card. So he takes it and he's holding it upside down, so he clearly can't read. And I don't know what he wants to do. I don't know what his, we're talking in sort of semi-broken Arabic, and I just decided I have this radio. I picked up the radio and I called Post 1, the Marine Guard at the consulate, and I said, just want to let you know, I've been stopped by a Saudi policeman. I don't know if this is going to mean anything, but I just want to put it on the record, and I'll get back to you if there's a problem, you know. And he saw me do that, and he figured I'm going to let him go. But beyond that, no, I was never in these extreme situations like in Iraq where people were literally shot at or under rocket fire. I've been in situations where going out to see the Jewish community in Damascus, I worried, and when I was in Syria, I often worried about how I could make contacts very easily. Never a problem making contact. What I worried about was, because I knew I was being watched, was what would happen to those contacts after I left. Were they going to be called into the intelligence and possibly beaten up with a rubber hose or something like that? That was something that kind of preyed on me sometimes, but you know, it's a bit like being a reporter. You can't dwell too much on that, otherwise you're not going to do your job. Yes, ma'am.
So you've obviously had a very diverse experience, personally, professionally, politically, linguistically. So, William, from your perspective, if we were going to give advice to someone coming here to Paris and France to make this transition to a new life, what would be advice that you would give them? Some
Contact
tips.
Adrian Leeds.
Thank you.
The check is in the mail.
Well, definitely subscribe.
Made you say
Definitely subscribe to her newsletter.
I already do that. I do that.
You know, I was lucky. You know, when you arrive at any post, including Paris, the post gives you a lot of information, written information on what to expect, and there's often an orientation session. You know, and so I was very lucky as far as all of that was concerned. I tend to do, you know, I think the most important thing that I would tell somebody is, nowadays with the internet, is go online and get into some of the expat forums that exist to you know, think about the things that you would wonder, you know, from taxes to lodging to, you know, even security if that matters, and, you know, find out what people are saying. I mean, the thing is, if you're talking about Paris, from my point of view, if you're coming to Paris and you're sweating the cultural and linguistic aspects of it, unless you've got a job, you know, you're going to be doing a lot of professional things. Maybe Paris isn't the place you want to come to, or you want to take some time, or you ought to get into it gradually. But assuming you have, you're relatively confident in the language, you may want to look up, you know, you may want to take more intense language courses, but you can get around, you can get food, you can get your basic necessities taken care of. If you sort of have an idea about, you know, you've been here before, you know how to get around the city and that kind of thing, then I think it just becomes a matter of, you know, it's more of an administrative thing. What boxes do I need to check? What things do I need to know about? What potential traps could I fall into if I don't take care of something? And, you know, I would include things that are important, but may not seem to be so in the same way to Americans as understanding what being a utility customer means here. Because until you are in the EDF or whatever gas system now, you know, is out there, you almost don't exist, because that you know, in addition to being sort of your contract for having that utility, it's also proof that you exist in Paris. And a lot of Americans don't understand that. And so that's why I say, you know, reading things like Adrian's site, reading, you know, going to some of the online publications and finding out those kinds of things are very important, because the administrative hassles of getting settled here are some of the hardest things that I ever encountered, and a lot of them I just never really thought of until I got here. In fact, being here as a retiree was a totally different experience than being here with the embassy, because suddenly I had to declare myself to the French government in a way that I didn't have to do before.
William, we discourage our clients from the forums, from reading the information on the forums, because we find that, first of all, there's a certain kind of person that's on the forums. Okay, they're not the ones they're usually the ones touting the problems that they've had, not necessarily how to go about doing it correctly. And so you have to be careful that you can get an awful lot of misinformation through these forums.
No, I hear you.
No, honestly, because we have a bevy of professionals that advise based on having real information, not just the hearsay from each other.
No, I hear you. I hear you. I've always taken forums with a grain of salt, but then I'm old enough and experienced enough to deal with these things, or dealing with these things, that I know to do that. I also, I think again, it depends on where you are in all of this. If you know somebody who's in Paris already, that's the person or people who are here. Those are the ones, or in France, those are the people I would go to first to get a lot of this advice, because I agree. If you're, I hope nobody is just starting out totally cold and thinking, I might want to go to live in France, without the benefit of talking to somebody who's actually experienced it. Because if they haven't, I think that's a danger. Yes, sir.
Same with me.
Sorry?
I'm, if you look up the dictionary, that stupid person, my picture.
Okay.
23 years.
This week.
You weren't so stupid. You were great. You were great.
The first person that I met in France, 23 years.
It's true.
Well, no,
I've been obeying your existence since.
Well, no, again, I think, I remember, I talked to Adrian a bit about this. I'm still in the Foreign Service when this happened, We were lucky that one of the people we knew, early on in the whole property acquisition process was somebody who sadly also died of cancer, Stefan Denner, who at the Woolwich Bank, who was phenomenal. When I went looking for an apartment,
Was that Stefan?
Stefan.
Aw, Stefan Denner.
Yeah. This is pre-internet. This is when you waited until the Thursday edition of the Figaro came out.
I miss
with all
him
the,
so
the,
much.
The ads. You picked up the free giveaway things in the boxes, and it was
The Fusac?
Huh?
The Fusac?
No, the real estate stuff. It was
Particular.
yeah, exactly.
PAP.
And I, that was a hunt and peck of major proportions. Finding the place that you wanted, then lining up the financing. I didn't know about you.
Well, I didn't exist
You
then.
didn't exist then. And
Well, I existed, but I was doing the same thing you were doing.
Right, your present incarnation.
I had to figure out a lot of stuff.
No, I was doing the same thing he was doing.
Had a couple of living in France guys that are mostly written. Everything in English is mostly written for Brits. It's not written for Americans. And
At the
so
time,
I had to
yeah.
adapt a lot of that and figure it out on my own. So.
What year did you start doing your thing?
2002. Actual, yeah, December 2001, but I don't count it.
He did
Yeah.
what?
Started by, this whole insanity. Started. But I was working for International Living at the time, and their readers needed somebody to help them find property. So I hired somebody to do that. Here I am. Yeah. But there's also a couple of forums who are kind of, they're fake forums. They're not real forums. They're forums that are managed by people who have their own agenda, and so you have to be careful.
Well, and James remembers this from when I was president of Arrow. I was always very upset that the bottom line for so many of the folks helping with tax preparation want to charge you a fee for the least little thing. And a lot of this stuff is just, no, I just want to understand what the little the little boxes on the form mean. And actually, again, talking about the British versus Americans, there is a British publication put out every year that explains all of this, but it's not entirely geared to Americans.
No,
You
not
know,
at
Americans
all.
don't have that. And I tried to get Arrow at one point to invest in hiring somebody to write such a guide that would be updated and could be sold for like 20 euros. And got into an endless argument. Well, we can't be giving tax advice because then we're legally liable. It's not really that. It's, you know, this is like a tax guide that you would buy, you know, to the 1040 form in the United States that would simply walk you through what each of these boxes means. It's not rocket science filling out a French tax form. And in fact, if you get with a tax preparer, suddenly you're probably declaring much more than you necessarily need to in exposing yourself to the French in terms of revealing information about your situation back in the States, which is often none of their business. So that was always, to me, one of the things that bothered me. It was because I could never get what I considered to be straightforward information. And you know what my solution was? I went to the tax office the first time I filled out my form. I explained my situation, and they told me what to do, and I've been following that ever since. And you know, and I know, and I can now understand enough of the form and how it works. So,
But it's very complicated. Okay.
It can be very complicated.
Only if you speak fluent French.
yeah.
No.
It doesn't exist here.
No, but I mean, listen, I believe in professional advice because you can do it yourself and you can screw yourself up royally, okay, by not understanding certain things.
Yeah,
So,
well, and like
yeah.
I say, I you know, it's a question of whether that professional advice, you know, whether that professional advice is really worth it, and how much of that professional advice is padded, you know, in order to, you know, they're going to tell you, well, the only way you can do this is by doing your entire tax form, giving you tax advice, or giving you an explanation of what the forms mean. That's not interesting for them, which is why I said a guide that would do that for you, that somebody could you know
Start
could
a new
sell.
business. We have, okay, for instance, we have an immigration attorney,
Yeah.
but we also have someone we call a handholder, right? Because maybe you don't need the level of an immigration attorney, but you want someone who guides you through the process, who understands how to do that better than you do yourself,
Right.
right? So that you end up getting through the process smoother. So there are different levels of professionals out there. They do exist. We happen to know them.
Well, there's
Just
another.
so you know.
Getting back to my consular experience. So I remember one of the things. The consular people in State Department do not like immigration attorneys in the U.S. And you know, it's a thriving business. It has always been a thriving business in the U.S. And you know, and they're looking to intervene in every possible thing, from non-immigrant visas to, you know, full-blown immigrant visas. The consular view is most people who understand a basic level of English, and now I think a lot of documents are translated into Spanish, can do most of what is required themselves, right? You don't need an immigration attorney to work you through this. They'll do it, they'll take the business, and they'll write letters, and they'll do all kinds of things that go possibly beyond what you actually need to do, but they're there to provide that service. I took the same kind of view here in France. I said, I'm going to do this myself. I said, my French is good enough that I can get myself my carte de séjour. I mean, I went to the embassy in in Washington. I got all the forms. I could fill them out. I ran through the checklist of everything that was needed, and got the documents together. I didn't need somebody to do that for me, but then I was able to, you know, because I took the view that I could do this myself as long as I understood what was required. Mm-hmm. That does need a certain level of French. If you don't have the level of French, then you need help. But the attitude of immigration people who enforce the laws in Washington is that most immigration attorneys in the United States are ripping their clients off because our clients could do this stuff. they're just not, they're either, for whatever reason, because they don't understand the language well enough, and they're afraid of making a mistake that could get them deported. The fear of God is planted into them, that they don't do that. It's a tough choice and a very personal choice people have to make. Yes, sir.
William, can you talk about what's coming up with the European Union and Americans that want to come to France or other countries? Like the U.S. already has the ESTA, the French going there, and they're implementing that.
Right.
I don't know, maybe you know.
ETIAS, I think is what it's called.
ETIAS.
Well, they keep pushing back the deadline, and it sounds like I think France now wants to push the deadline back past the Olympics. I don't think they want to force everybody to go through the hassle of.
Any traveler coming in is going to have to fill this out.
Yeah, I mean, any.
Visa.
No, it's like ESTA. It's a way for people. It's a way for the European Union to. No. To screen and to have more information in case they need it on the travelers who are coming. It's I see it as a reciprocal thing.
Yeah.
It makes perfect sense to me. We imposed this on the rest of on those countries where we said people didn't need visas, but due to all the things that have changed, since 2001 or since 9/11, well, that's just not enough anymore. So it's been long overdue, in my view, but when it will ultimately go into effect, I have no idea. The one thing that I will say for anybody who's here on a legal immigration basis, who has a titre de séjour, is it's not supposed to cover them. You're already in the system, so to speak. Now, in my opinion, how that's going to happen, how that's going to play out in terms of when you show up at the airport and then you're arguing with somebody in the United States to get on the flight, and you say, they say, what about you're not in the ETIAS system. Well, but I don't need to be because, but yes you do. But no, I don't. Yes you do. No, I don't. I don't know how ultimately all of this is going to play out. Because if you're dealing with Air France, that's one thing. They're probably going to understand all of that. But if you're dealing with Delta, United, or you're some feeder location somewhere out in the boonies, and you're making a connection through a major airport, like Washington or New York, to fly to Europe, I don't know how they're going to implement this. So.
How does America?
Hmm?
How does the American government implement people coming in?
Well, it's this ESTA system. Yeah, you have to apply. You have to. Again, I haven't had to do it. You go online and you fill out the information. It's this personal information, date of birth, and full name, and the name that passport number. Everything. The whole idea is everything has to match up, right? And in fact, if you noticed on my passport back then, I could go by W. William Jordan. Well, now I have to spell out what the W is, and I hate my first name, which is why I don't give it to you. But that's where we are now. It all has to match up, and it's an extra step that for which you have to pay. And so you go through this, and if you're already in the system, and again, I can't remember how all of this works, and it's confusing to me as far as ETIAS is concerned, but when you're in ESTA, it's valid for a certain number of 2 years. 2 years, okay. So you can make however many trips back to the U.S. in the course of 2 years, and you're covered. In a way, the way I look at it is it's a bit like global entry.
Thank you. Thanks for coming.
But without having the ability to sweep through the global entry. ESTA just gets it's just another burdensome step to get you through the door. The thing about visas that we were told, and this is absolutely true, a visa does not guarantee you entry into another country. You get a visa from an embassy, like the American embassy here, the consulate here. That just means that a consular officer has reviewed your application, has reviewed your passport, has looked up whether there's background information on you, and decided, yeah, this person, for the purposes that they've specified, is qualified to request entry into the United States. It's at the port of entry that an immigration officer makes the final determination whether you get in. And if that officer has reason to question the visa that was issued, now it doesn't often happen, but when it does happen, they can, they can subject you to secondary interrogation and possibly decide, no, you can't be let into the U.S. It's
How the young woman who got to Atlanta and the dog disappeared, been gone for 3 weeks, was found yesterday finally. They kicked her back out of the United States. The dog was free.
In the conversation, we've talked about some Americans getting French nationality. Other Americans are lucky to sort of almost have gotten it automatically. When an American today takes French nationality, do you keep your American nationality?
Oh, sure, it's dual
Unless you renounce
citizenship.
it, you have to renounce your American nationality. There's a formal process. It's an expensive, lengthy process. But yeah, however you acquire American nationality, whether it's
You're stuck with it.
natural born American, as the phrase is,
Yeah.
or naturalization, you keep it. I mean, there was for a long time, and I'll bring up Josephine Baker because I was really hoping to at one point try to get Josephine Baker's nationality, American nationality back. She lost her nationality not because she renounced it explicitly. She lost it because she married a French national. And under the laws in France and the United States at that time, women, not men, women who married, foreign nationals, usually lost their American nationality.
God, I didn't know that.
But they got French nationality automatically.
Yeah, she got her French nationality.
But
She applied for and got French nationality as a consequence of that marriage. But I mean, I researched this a bit, because there was a lot of talk about how she was so upset about this segregation in the United States, how she was treated, that she gave up her nationality. No, she never gave up her nationality. And as far as I can tell, I think that her presence at the 1963 March on Washington demonstrated that she still felt very American. And I talked with members of her Rainbow family who affirmed that, she still in her heart considered herself very much to be an American. She never intentionally renounced her citizenship. It was just that she gave it up as a consequence of marrying a foreign national. And I suspect, again, this is something you can never prove because I can't talk to Josephine Baker about this, but I suspect that she felt the process, because there was a process, the women who married and lost their nationality under those circumstances, if they got divorced or their husbands died, they could request restoration of their nationality. I think Josephine Baker decided, I don't care about this, especially after she was treated so badly in the last.
And then she no longer was obligated for tax returns. Let's face it.
Well, I don't. Yeah, I mean, that
Boris
would.
Johnson? But it's been, 60 years now since dual nationality has accepted between France and the U.S.
It's not just a question of between the U.S. and France. It's
Well, so
also
many countries now. You could have three.
Well,
citizens.
okay, there are two aspects of this. One is how the country, other than the United States, treats dual nationality, and that can vary from country to country. And I think you're right that France changed a lot of its laws about 2 years ago. In the U.S., the changes have been mostly a function of Supreme Court decisions. And in addition to questions having to do with dual nationality, whether you can have dual nationality, there's also been the questions of how you can lose your nationality. Because you can lose your nationality, there are what are called expatriating acts. For a long time, one of the expatriating acts was serving in the military of a foreign government. Well, there was a famous case called versus Rust or something like that, where the U.S. State Department tried to strip the nationality of an American citizen who served in the Israeli army. apply here. It applies in cases where somebody joins the army or the military of a country that is in a state of hostility with the United States. And I think this is, and I think that some jurisprudence looks at the issues of, for example, belonging to terrorist organizations, because now non-state actors are almost as important or more important than countries. But as far as the U.S., there's a way the U.S. looks at this. And there's a way the U.S. looks at this. Whatever your other nationality might be, if you're an American, you're always going to be an American. Other countries, though, might say no. And in the case of Boris Johnson and some people who, there are a lot of places in the world where people have had to give up not just their American citizenship in order to say run for president or elected position in their other country, but also people who my brain has jumped the track.
Who are very rich and don't want to pay the
No. But
who were never born in the U.S. No, who were born in the U.S. but who never lived in the
How was Johnson American? He was born in the U.S.
Yeah,
He's an accidental American.
well, that's the classic case. If somebody is born in the United States, we had this situation in Saudi Arabia very often, where there were a lot of Saudi students in the United States. These were weird cases when they would come up, but they came up a lot. I'd be at the visa window, and I'd get a the family wants to go visit Disney World, right? And of course, what do? Because Saudis could then generally get visas like that, they show up like 2 hours before their flight takes off. Well, turns out, little Muhammad was born in the U.S. when Abdul Jabbar al-Muhammad was studying in the United States. And I have to say, sir, your son is an American citizen. Your son cannot travel to the United States on a Saudi passport. It's against the law. Americans have to enter the United States on an American passport. And Abu Jabbar Muhammad would be like, what do you mean? Should have come in a month ago or so before, when you knew you were going to make this trip, you shouldn't have waited until the last minute. Those were real life situations we had to deal with all the time. We could issue, it would take a couple of hours to issue a new passport then, not now. One of the things that used to freak me out, there was a safe in the back of my office. That safe had like 300 blank passports. That used to freak me out. Has anybody seen the film Argo? Okay, you know that there's a scene at the beginning. I mean, that film rang true. I was so thrilled that it got the Oscar that year. There's a scene where they're in the consulate, and they realize the chancery, the main part of the embassy, has been overrun. But the students haven't noticed them, and they have a chance to get out, before it's too late. But they know they have to basically destroy everything before they go, and it shows them. And I had these things. I mean, this is one of the things I loved about it. They got this exactly right. They have these little metal plates or little metal trays. You put the visa plates. They were metal plates. Put them in there. You have a ball-peen hammer and you smash those things upside down. I kept saying though, when I talked to people about the film, that they didn't show how they destroyed the passports, and that was always my nightmare. That if anything happened and we had to destroy everything, I didn't know how I was going to destroy 300 passport plates. These things, things are, I mean, I didn't have a shredder in my office, and
burn them.
Rip the damn thing. Well, no.
Have a destroy button on it?
We didn't. I mean, I did hear about some places where we weren't one of them, and I think they were mostly for document. After what happened in Tehran, in the Congo areas, they did come up with things that would
Oh.
Thank you most of all for your indulgence. I realize that it wasn't exactly the most scintillating performance, but
Yes,
thank
it
you.
was.
Thank you for listening.
Yes, it was, right?
And
I'm
I will
standing
tell
right
you.
in
I
front
will
of the
tell
light.
you. Please pay for your drinks. Don't forget.
Thank you, William. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Thank you. It's delightful.